Throughout the day, Naomi felt the weight of unspoken judgments pressing down on her. She found herself assigned the most challenging and undesirable tasks while her white colleagues received straightforward cases. "Naomi, would you mind taking Mr. Johnson in room 305? A fellow nurse asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "He's been a bit challenging today." Naomi nodded, fully aware that challenging was an understatement. Mr. Johnson was notorious for his racist outbursts and had already brought 2 nurses to tears that week. Yet, Naomi approached the task with unwavering professionalism, determined to prove her worth. As she entered Mr. Johnson's room, bracing herself for the inevitable tirade, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that this assignment was yet another test of her resolve, or worse, a setup for failure. "What are you doing here?" Mr. Johnson Street, St. Mary's General Hospital, a hallmark of health care in a wealthy suburban neighborhood, was about to face an unforeseen challenge. When Naomi Clark, an accomplished African-American nurse, joined the staff, she was unaware of the deep-rooted biases she would confront. As tensions rose and conflicts emerged, a seemingly ordinary patient named Michael Thompson lay quietly in his hospital bed, but he was far from just any patient. His presence was poised to instigate change. What hidden influence did this enigmatic patient possess, and how could one nurse's battle spark institutional transformation? Before we explore this story, comment below with where you're tuning in from today. If you appreciate tales filled with unexpected turns and moments of justice, don't forget to subscribe. The immaculate halls of St. Mary's General Hospital shimmered under the harsh fluorescent lights as Naomi took her first steps inside. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and an undercurrent of tension that made her stomach churn. Despite her anxiety, Naomi squared her shoulders and lifted her chin, determined to leave a positive impression. Approaching the nurse's station, Naomi noticed the abrupt silence that enveloped the area. Conversations dwindled to murmurs, and eyes quickly averted as if they feared contact. She swallowed hard, pushing down the familiar isolation threatening to engulf her. "Excuse me," Naomi said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "I'm Naomi Clark, the new nurse. Could you direct me to the head nurse's office?" A blonde nurse looked up, her blue eyes widening slightly before a practiced smile emerged. "Of course," she replied, her tone polite yet cool. "Down the hall, 3rd door on the right." Naomi nodded, making her way down the corridor, acutely aware of the eyes tracking her. The sound of her shoes echoed like thunder in the unnaturally quiet space. As she neared the office, a tall, distinguished man in a white coat exited a nearby room. His salt and pepper hair and commanding presence marked him as a senior physician. Naomi's heart raced with hope. Perhaps this was her chance to forge a positive connection. "Good morning, doctor," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Naomi Clark, the new nurse starting today. It's a pleasure to meet you." The doctor's steel-gray eyes scanned her, his expression impassive. "Dr. James Barrett," he replied curtly. "I trust you've been properly oriented to our protocols." Before Naomi could respond, Dr. Barrett continued, "We maintain very high standards here at St. Mary's. I hope you're prepared to meet them." Without waiting for a reply, he brushed past her, leaving Naomi standing alone in the hallway, her outstretched hand slowly dropping to her side. The encounter left her feeling deflated, but Naomi refused to let it dampen her spirits. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and knocked on the head nurse's door. While waiting for a response, her mind wandered back to nursing school, her mother's voice echoing in her memory. "Baby girl, you're going to have to fight twice as hard as everyone else, but never let them see you sweat. You come from a long line of strong women, and you've got that same strength in you." Naomi recalled late-night study sessions, extra hours in the lab, and the constant pressure to prove herself, along with the dismissive glances from some professors and the raised eyebrows when she excelled. Amid whispered remarks from classmates doubting her place, Naomi persevered. She graduated at the top of her class, her determination and skills silencing even the most critical voices. Now, standing in the halls of St. Mary's, Naomi drew strength from those memories. She had faced challenges before and would do so again. The door opened to reveal a stern, middle-aged woman. "Miss Clark, I presume," she said, her tone clipped. "Come in. We have much to cover, and I expect you to keep up." As Naomi followed the head nurse into the office, she felt she was stepping into more than just a new job. The hospital's atmosphere seemed charged with tension, like a silent storm brewing beneath the facade of professionalism. Little did she know, her presence would soon become a catalyst for change, challenging long-standing biases and exposing the toxic culture hidden behind St. Mary's prestigious exterior. Naomi's first day flew by in a whirlwind of orientations, introductions, and paperwork. As she navigated the hospital, she noticed subtle signs of her exclusion. Conversations fell silent as she approached, only to resume in hushed tones once she passed. Her attempts at small talk with fellow nurses met with polite but distant responses, making her feel like an outsider in what should have been a collaborative space. By the time her shift ended, Naomi felt mentally and emotionally drained. While gathering her belongings from her locker, she overheard two nurses whispering around the corner. "Did you see the new hire?" one murmured. "Yeah, I don't know what they were thinking," the other replied. "This isn't exactly the neighborhood for—" Naomi's hand froze on her locker door, her heart sinking. She had hoped the initial coldness was just first-day nerves, but the reality was painfully clear. This wasn't just a new job, it was a daily fight against prejudice and misconceptions. As she left the hospital, the weight of the day pressed heavily on her shoulders. Walking to the bus stop, Naomi's mind raced with emotions. The excitement she felt that morning had transformed into a gnawing sense of doubt and isolation. Sitting on the hard plastic bench, she pulled out her phone and dialed a familiar number. After 2 rings, a warm, comforting voice answered. "Hey, baby girl, how was your first day?" Hearing her mother's voice brought tears to Naomi's eyes. She took a shaky breath, determined not to break down in public. "It was challenging, Mama," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A moment of silence followed before her mother spoke again, filled with understanding and strength. "Naomi Marie Clark, you listen to me. You've worked too hard to let anyone make you feel less than you are. Remember who you are and where you come from. You're not just there for yourself. You're there for every little black girl who dreams of being in those halls one day." Naomi closed her eyes, letting her mother's words wash over her. "I know, Mama. It's just, I didn't expect it to be this hard." "Nothing worth doing is ever easy, baby," her mother replied. "But you have the strength of generations behind you. Hold your head high, do your job better than anyone else, and don't you dare let them see you falter. Do you hear me?" "Yes, Mama," Naomi said, feeling a renewed sense of determination. "I hear you." As she ended the call, Naomi noticed a sleek black Mercedes slowed as it passed the bus stop. Through the tinted windows, Naomi caught a glimpse of Dr. Barrett, his eyes locking onto hers for a fleeting moment before the car sped away. Naomi squared her shoulders, her mother's words echoing in her mind. Though she was facing an uphill battle, she was far from alone. With the strength of her family behind her and her determination to prove herself, Naomi knew she could withstand whatever challenges St. Mary's presented. As the bus approached, Naomi stood ready to tackle another day. Little did she know that her presence at St. Mary's would soon trigger a series of events that would challenge the hospital's cultural foundations, exposing long-hidden biases and forcing a reckoning that was long overdue. The following weeks unfolded like a slow-burning fuse, each day adding more tension to Naomi Clark's already difficult work environment. The initial coolness she encountered had transformed into a more insidious form of exclusion, one that was harder to define but impossible to ignore. As Naomi made her morning rounds, she noticed a stark difference in how she was treated compared to her white colleagues. Dr. Barrett, in particular, seemed to take pleasure in finding fault in her work, regardless of her diligence. "Nurse Clark," Dr. Barrett called out one morning, his voice cutting through the busy nurses' station. "I hope you've familiarized yourself with our protocols by now. We can't afford any mistakes." The emphasis he placed on mistakes sent a chill down Naomi's spine. She met his gaze steadily, refusing to be intimidated. "Of course, Dr. Barrett. I assure you I'm fully versed in all hospital procedures," she replied, her voice steady. Dr. Barrett raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "We'll see about that, won't we? Let's hope you learned everything you need to here." The barely concealed condescension in his tone didn't escape Naomi or the other nurses, who pretended to be busy while obviously eavesdropping. "Together, we can make real, lasting change." As they parted ways, Angela reflected on how much had transformed in just a few short days. From feeling isolated and ready to give up, she now stood at the forefront of a movement that could change not only St. Mary's, but the entire healthcare industry. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and resistance from those reluctant to embrace change. However, as Angela looked back at the hospital, she felt a surge of determination. This was no longer just a job, it was a calling, a chance to ensure that no healthcare professional would have to endure what she had experienced. With renewed purpose, Angela set off into the evening, prepared to face whatever challenges awaited her. The transformation at St. Mary's had begun, ushering in a new chapter in the fight for equality and inclusion in healthcare. In the months that followed Mr. Edwards's revelation, St. Mary's General Hospital underwent a remarkable transformation under Angela's leadership as Chief Diversity Officer. With Mr. Edwards's ongoing support, the previously toxic culture began to shift toward inclusivity and respect. The mandatory diversity and inclusion training, initially met with skepticism, gradually opened eyes and changed hearts. Dr. Thompson, following a comprehensive investigation, was dismissed from his role, sending a clear message that discriminatory behavior would no longer be tolerated. As the changes at St. Mary's gained traction, Angela found herself in high demand as a speaker at medical conferences and diversity seminars. 1 year after Mr. Edwards' intervention, she stood before a packed audience at a national health care conference. "A year ago, I was a nurse on the brink of giving up," Angela began. "Today, I stand before you as living proof that change is possible and that one voice can make a difference." She shared the inspiring story of St. Mary's transformation, candidly addressing the challenges faced while also celebrating the victories. The lives touched, minds changed, and culture shifted. After the conference, Mr. Edwards, now fully recovered from his injuries, approached Angela with a warm smile. "Angela," he greeted her, "you've come a long way from the nurse I met a year ago." They discussed the progress at St. Mary's and its ripple effects across the healthcare industry. Mr. Edwards revealed that several other hospitals in the Healthcare United network had begun implementing similar programs. "You know, Angela," he said, "when I checked into St. Mary's after my skiing accident, I never could have imagined the journey it would set in motion. You've not only transformed St. Mary's, but also reignited my passion for this work." As Angela prepared to return to St. Mary's, she reflected on her incredible journey from an isolated, frustrated nurse to a leader and change-maker. She had come so far, and while the work was far from over, Angela felt a sense of hope and determination stronger than ever. Upon her return to St. Mary's, she was greeted by Sarah, once a distant colleague but now a strong ally. The hospital buzzed with renewed energy, staff members collaborating and communicating in ways they never had before. In the main lobby, Angela paused before a new mural depicting a diverse group of healthcare professionals working together. A plaque below read, "Diversity is our strength. Inclusion is our commitment. Compassion is our calling." As she settled into her office, ready to tackle new challenges, Angela smiled. The transformation of St. Mary's was just the beginning. The real work of changing hearts, minds, and entire systems was ongoing, and she was ready for it all, committed to fighting for a truly inclusive healthcare system, one day at a time. What moment in Angela's journey resonated with you the most? Was it her perseverance in the face of discrimination, or perhaps Mr. Edwards's unexpected intervention? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I pour my heart into crafting these inspiring stories for you, and your support is what keeps me going. I appreciate having you on this journey. She met Dr. Barrett's gaze steadily, refusing to show any sign of intimidation. "Of course, Dr. Barrett. I'll see to it right away." As Dr. Barrett walked away, a smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth, and Angela heard him mutter under his breath, "Let's see how she handles this." Throughout the day, Angela found herself racing from one difficult case to another, barely catching her breath. The patients assigned to her were among the most demanding in the hospital, many with complex medical needs and challenging personalities. Despite the overwhelming workload, Angela refused to let her standards slip, approaching each patient with the same level of care and professionalism, even as exhaustion began to set in. However, the constant pressure took its toll both physically and emotionally. As she rushed to respond to yet another call light, she overheard two of her colleagues whispering nearby. "Can you believe they're letting her handle all these critical cases?" one nurse said, her voice laced with disdain. "It's like they're just waiting for her to mess up." "I know," the other replied, "but you have to admit, it's impressive how she keeps going. I would have cracked by now." A mix of anger and hurt washed over Angela. The realization that her colleagues were not only aware of the unfair treatment, but were actively watching to see if she would fail, felt almost unbearable. As the day progressed, Angela found herself making more frequent trips to Mr. Edwards' room. Unlike the rest of the hospital, his room had become a sanctuary for her, a place where she could catch her breath and feel, if only for a moment, that someone recognized her true worth. "Good to see you, Nurse Clark," Mr. Edwards greeted her during a routine check. "You look exhausted. Is everything all right?" Angela managed a weak smile. "Just a busy day, Mr. Edwards. Nothing I can't handle." Mr. Edwards studied her face for a moment, concern filling his eyes. "You know," he said carefully, "there's a difference between handling something and truly thriving. From what I've seen, you're more than capable of the latter." His kind words only highlighted the stark contrast between how Mr. Edwards treated her and how the rest of the hospital staff did. Angela felt a lump form in her throat. The weight of her isolation threatened to overwhelm her. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I appreciate your kindness." As she turned to leave, Mr. Edwards called out to her. "Nurse Clark," he said, his voice filled with a quiet authority that made her pause. "Remember, sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to speak up." Angela left the room, her mind racing with thoughts and feelings. Each day at Riverside Hospital, as she boarded the bus, Naomi's mind swirled with emotions. The excitement and hope she had felt when she first joined the staff seemed like a distant memory, now replaced by a grim determination to endure in this hostile environment. Yet, amid the turmoil, a small voice in the back of her mind insisted that something had to change. The question remained. Would she be the one to crack under the relentless pressure? Or could her perseverance finally spark a shift in the toxic culture of Riverside? Little did Naomi know, an unexpected ally was on the verge of entering her life, one who could tip the scales in her favor and unearth the deep-seated prejudices that had long festered within Riverside General Hospital. As the bus rolled through the darkening streets, Naomi closed her eyes, drawing strength from her mother's words and the legacy of resilience coursing through her veins. Tomorrow would bring another battle, but she was determined to face it head-on, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Naomi arrived at Riverside with renewed resolve. She had spent the night reflecting on her experiences and reminding herself why she had chosen to become a nurse in the first place: to help people, regardless of their background or her own struggles. As she approached the nurses' station, Naomi noticed a flurry of activity. Nurses were hurriedly preparing a room, and there was an air of anticipation she hadn't felt before. "What's going on?" Naomi asked one of her colleagues, curious about the commotion. The nurse, momentarily forgetting her usual coolness toward Naomi, replied with excitement, "We've got a VIP patient coming in, a big shot who had a skiing accident. Both arms are broken, from what I heard." Before Naomi could inquire further, Dr. Barrett appeared, his expression stern. "Nurse Clark," he said, his voice clipped, "I need you to handle the new admission in room 412. Mr. Thomas Edwards has suffered a severe skiing accident and has both arms broken. I expect you to provide him with the utmost care and attention." Naomi nodded, recognizing the assignment for what it was, another test. "Of course, Dr. Barrett. I'll see to it right away." As she made her way to room 412, a nagging feeling told her this assignment was different somehow. The importance surrounding this patient made her wonder if there was more to the situation than met the eye. Entering the room, Naomi was greeted by the sight of a middle-aged man lying in bed, both arms encased in casts. Despite his injuries, he radiated a quiet authority that Naomi immediately recognized. "Good morning, Mr. Edwards," she said, approaching the bed with a warm smile. "I'm Nurse Naomi Clark, and I'll be taking care of you during your stay." Mr. Edwards looked up at her, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Good morning, Nurse Clark," he replied, his voice surprisingly strong despite his condition. "I appreciate your help. I must say, I didn't expect to end up here after my skiing accident." As Naomi began to check his vitals, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this patient would bring a change not only to her day, but also to the overarching challenges she faced at Riverside Hospital. Each day at Riverside Hospital, as she boarded the bus, Naomi's mind swirled with emotions. The excitement and hope she had felt when she first joined the staff seemed like a distant memory, now replaced by a grim determination to endure in this hostile environment. Yet, amid the turmoil, a small voice in the back of her mind insisted that something had to change. The question remained. Would she be the one to crack under the relentless pressure, or could her perseverance finally spark a shift in the toxic culture of Riverside? Little did Naomi know, an unexpected ally was on the verge of entering her life, one who could tip the scales in her favor and unearth the deep-seated prejudices that had long festered within Riverside General Hospital. As the bus rolled through the darkening streets, Naomi closed her eyes, drawing strength from her mother's words and the legacy of resilience coursing through her veins. Tomorrow would bring another battle, but she was determined to face it head-on, no matter what challenges lay ahead. The next morning, Naomi arrived at Riverside with renewed resolve. She had spent the night reflecting on her experiences and reminding herself why she had chosen to become a nurse in the first place: to help people, regardless of their background or her own struggles. As she approached the nurses' station, Naomi noticed a flurry of activity. Nurses were hurriedly preparing a room, and there was an air of anticipation she hadn't felt before. "What's going on?" Naomi asked one of her colleagues, curious about the commotion. The nurse, momentarily forgetting her usual coolness toward Naomi, replied with excitement, "We've got a VIP patient coming in, a big shot who had a skiing accident. Both arms are broken, from what I heard." Before Naomi could inquire further, Dr. Barrett appeared, his expression stern. "Nurse Clark," he said, his voice clipped, "I need you to handle the new admission in room 412. Mr. Thomas Edwards has suffered a severe skiing accident and has both arms broken. I expect you to provide him with the utmost care and attention." Naomi nodded, recognizing the assignment for what it was: another test. "Of course, Dr. Barrett. I'll see to it right away." As she made her way to room 412, a nagging feeling told her this assignment was different somehow. The importance surrounding this patient made her wonder if there was more to the situation than met the eye. Entering the room, Naomi was greeted by the sight of a middle-aged man lying in bed, both arms encased in casts. Despite his injuries, he radiated a quiet authority that Naomi immediately recognized. "Good morning, Mr. Edwards," she said, approaching the bed with a warm smile. "I'm Nurse Naomi Clark, and I'll be taking care of you during your stay." Mr. Edwards looked up at her, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Good morning, Nurse Clark," he replied, his voice surprisingly strong despite his condition. "I appreciate your help. I must say, I didn't expect to end up here after my skiing accident." As Naomi began to check his vitals, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this patient would bring a change not only to her day, but also to the overarching challenges she faced at Riverside Hospital. Never hinting at the prejudice Naomi had come to expect. One afternoon, while she was changing Mr. Edwards' bandages, she overheard a conversation outside the room that made her blood run cold. "I don't care what Dr. Barrett says," a nurse hissed. "I don't trust that Clark woman with our VIP patient. Who knows what she might do?" "I know," another voice agreed, "but we can't say anything. They'll just accuse us of being racist." Naomi's hands trembled slightly as she finished her task, the weight of suspicion and mistrust pressing down on her. Mr. Edwards, ever observant, noticed her distress. "Is everything all right, Nurse Clark?" he asked, his voice gentle yet probing. Naomi forced a smile. "Of course, Mr. Edwards. Just concentrating on getting these bandages right." Mr. Edwards was silent for a moment, studying her face. "You know," he finally said, I've always believed that a person's true character is revealed not in how they treat their superiors, but in how they treat those they perceive as beneath them." Startled by the pointed nature of his comment, Naomi looked up. Mr. Edwards held her gaze, a knowing look in his eyes. "I've seen a lot in my time, Nurse Clark, and I can tell you that the view from this bed has been illuminating." Before Naomi could respond, Dr. Barrett entered the room, cutting their conversation short. As she left, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Edwards was more than just a VIP patient. His words hinted at a deeper understanding of the dynamics at play at Riverside. For the first time since starting there, she felt a glimmer of hope. Little did she know, Mr. Edwards' presence was about to set off a chain of events that would shake the very foundations of Riverside General Hospital, exposing the deep-seated prejudices festering beneath its polished exterior. As the days wore on, Naomi found herself increasingly isolated at Riverside. The initial coolness from her colleagues had transformed into outright hostility, with whispered comments and pointed glares following her everywhere. Emboldened by the absence of consequences for his behavior, Dr. Barrett became more overt in his attempts to undermine her. One morning, as Naomi reviewed patient charts at the nurse's station, Dr. Barrett approached her with a stack of files. "Nurse Clark," he said, his voice dripping with false concern, "I need you to handle these cases today. They're particularly challenging. I trust you're up to the task." Naomi looked at the pile, immediately recognizing it as nearly double the workload of her colleagues. Whirling with the implications of Mr. Edwards' words, Angela made her way back to the nurse's station, feeling an undercurrent of change in the air. Little did she know that the following day would unleash a series of events that would test her limits and lead to a confrontation that had been brewing since her first day at St. Mary's. The next morning, Angela arrived at work to find the hospital abuzz with heightened activity. Rumors circulated about a high-stakes emergency operation scheduled for later that day, with several board members and important visitors expected to observe. As Angela began her rounds, she couldn't help but notice the nervous energy permeating the hospital. Both nurses and doctors seemed on edge, the pressure of the impending operation weighing heavily on everyone's minds. Midway through her morning duties, Dr. Barrett approached Angela, a glint in his eye that immediately put her on guard. "Nurse Clark," he said, his voice carefully neutral, "we need you to assist in the emergency operation this afternoon. It's a critical case, and I trust you're prepared to handle it." A mix of surprise and suspicion washed over Angela. Being asked to assist in such a high-profile operation was usually an honor, but given Dr. Barrett's demeanor, she couldn't shake the feeling that there might be an ulterior motive. "Of course, Dr. Barrett," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'll be ready." As Dr. Barrett walked away, Angela overheard him mutter to another doctor, "Let's see how she handles the pressure. This should be interesting." The hours leading up to the operation flew by in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Angela threw herself into her work, double and triple checking everything to ensure she was as prepared as possible for whatever challenges the surgery might bring. When she scrubbed in, she couldn't ignore the skeptical glances from some of the other staff members. Taking a deep breath, she reminded herself of her mother's words, "Don't you dare let them see you falter." As the operation began, Angela found herself working alongside Dr. Barrett and several other senior staff members. The tension in the room was palpable, the knowledge that important observers were watching adding an extra layer of pressure. Despite the challenging circumstances, Angela remained focused, her movements precise and efficient. She anticipated the surgeon's needs, handing them instruments before they even asked, her years of training and experience shining through. However, as the operation progressed, Angela noticed something unsettling that made her heart race. Angela's heart raced as she observed Dr. Barrett, usually so confident, hesitating. His hands trembled slightly as he prepared for a critical incision. In that split second, she realized he was about to make a potentially life-threatening mistake. Without hesitation, she spoke up. "Dr. Barrett," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Perhaps we should consider approaching from a different angle. The patient's anatomy suggests it might be safer." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Angela. Dr. Barrett's face flashed with a mix of surprise and anger. For a moment, she feared he might dismiss her suggestion outright, but then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded and adjusted his approach. As the operation continued, it became clear that her intervention had likely saved the patient's life. As the surgery concluded successfully, Angela felt the weight of many eyes upon her. Some regarded her with newfound respect, while others, including Dr. Barrett, appeared to seethe with barely contained anger. As they began to clean up, Dr. Barrett turned to Angela, his voice low and menacing. "Nurse Clark, I need to see you in private. Now." Angela followed Dr. Barrett out of the operating room, her heart pounding. She knew she had done the right thing, but it might have just cost her job. Upon entering a private room, she was surprised to find it was Mr. Edwards' room. She had forgotten he was still a patient. However, Dr. Barrett seemed too angry to notice their location. As soon as the door closed behind them, he rounded on Angela, his face red with fury. "How dare you question my judgment in there?" he hissed, venom dripping from his voice. "Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? You're lucky I don't have you fired on the spot for such insubordination." Angela stood her ground, her voice calm but firm. "Dr. Barrett, I was simply doing my job." "Your job?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "Your job is to follow orders, not to think you know better than your superiors. This is exactly why people like you don't belong in a prestigious institution like St. Mary's. You're here because of some misguided attempt at diversity, not because you have any real skill or knowledge." As Dr. Barrett's tirade grew increasingly racist and hostile, Angela felt a wave of anger and despair wash over her. Every slight and microaggression she had endured seemed insignificant compared to this blatant display of prejudice. Just as she was about to respond, a voice cut through the room, stopping Dr. Barrett mid-sentence. "Dr. Barrett," Mr. Edwards said, his voice filled with quiet authority that commanded attention. Both Angela and Dr. Barrett turned in surprise to see Mr. Edwards sitting up in his bed, anger etched on his face. "Mr. Edwards," Dr. Barrett stammered, paling as he realized the gravity of his mistake. "I didn't realize you were awake. I apologize for disturbing you." "Oh, I'm very much awake, Doctor." "Barrett," Mr. Edwards replied, his eyes narrowing, "and I've been awake long enough to observe the disgraceful way you and others in this hospital have treated Nurse Clark." Angela stood frozen, unable to believe what she was hearing. The quiet, unassuming patient was suddenly radiating an aura of power and authority that filled the room. "Dr. Barrett," he continued, his voice steady, "I assure you, this isn't how we treat our staff, especially those who demonstrate true competence and care for their patients." Dr. Barrett opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. The dynamic in the room had shifted, and Angela felt a surge of hope for the first time in a long while. There's been no misunderstanding, Mr. Edwards interrupted sharply. What I've witnessed during my stay here is a clear pattern of discrimination and harassment, and it ends now. As he spoke, both Angela and Dr. Barrett realized he was far more than just a VIP patient. The authority in his voice and the way he carried himself revealed that he wielded significant power. "Who are you?" Dr. Barrett asked, his earlier bravado completely evaporating. Mr. Edwards smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm someone who has the power to make or break this hospital's future. And right now, Dr. Barrett, I'm not inclined to support an institution that allows such blatant racism and unprofessional behavior." The gravity of the situation sank in. Angela felt a mix of emotions wash over her: relief that someone finally acknowledged her treatment, anger at the injustices she faced, and a glimmer of hope that change might be on the horizon. Little did they know, this confrontation would set in motion a series of events that would shake St. Mary's General Hospital to its core, exposing long-hidden prejudices and forcing a reckoning that was long overdue. The tension in Mr. Edwards' room was palpable as his words resonated. Dr. Barrett's face paled as he struggled to regain his composure. Mr. Edwards, now fully upright, fixed Dr. Barrett with a steely gaze. "I think it's time we had a frank discussion about the culture of this hospital, don't you?" Before Dr. Barrett could respond, a nervous-looking nurse poked her head in. "Dr. Barrett, the hospital administrator's looking for you. It's urgent." He glanced between Mr. Edwards and the nurse, clearly torn. Finally, he nodded stiffly. "We'll continue this discussion later. Mr. Edwards, Nurse Parker, you're dismissed for now." As Dr. Barrett hurried out, Angela found herself alone with Mr. Edwards. The silence stretched heavy with unspoken words. "Nurse Parker," Mr. Edwards finally said, his voice gentler now, "I think it's time I properly introduced myself. My name is Thomas Edwards, and I'm the CEO of Healthcare United, one of the largest healthcare conglomerates in the country." Angela's eyes widened in shock. Healthcare United was a powerhouse in the medical world, known for its influence and resources. Suddenly, Mr. Edwards's earlier comments about having the power to make or break the hospital made perfect sense. "Mr. Edwards, Angela began, unsure of how to respond. "Please, sit down," he said, gesturing to a chair beside his bed. "I think we have a lot to discuss." Over the next hour, Mr. Edwards revealed that his stay at St. Mary's, which was unplanned due to a skiing accident, had opened his eyes to the deep-seated issues within the hospital. "I came here expecting nothing more than quality medical care," he explained. "Instead, I've witnessed a culture of discrimination and unprofessionalism that goes against everything I believe in as a healthcare leader." He went on to describe the subtle and overt discrimination Angela faced, the microaggressions and the toxic culture permeating the hospital. "Your experience, Nurse Parker, is unfortunately not unique," he said, his voice filled with anger and determination. "But it is unacceptable, and it ends now." As they talked, Angela felt a weight lift off her shoulders. For the first time since starting at St. Mary's, she felt truly seen and heard. As soon as he saw her, Mr. Johnson sneered. "I told them I don't want any black nurse touching me." Naomi took a deep breath, steeling herself against the onslaught of hateful words. "Mr. Johnson, I'm here to check your vitals and change your dressing. I assure you I'm more than qualified to provide your care." Despite enduring a constant stream of racial slurs and insults, Naomi maintained her composure. She completed her tasks with precision and care, refusing to let Mr. Johnson's bigotry compromise the quality of her work. When she finally emerged from the room, Dr. Barrett was waiting in the hallway, a look of feigned concern on his face. "Everything all right in there, Nurse Clark? We heard quite a commotion." Naomi met his gaze steadily. "Mr. Johnson's vitals are stable, and his dressing has been changed. Is there anything else you need from me?" Surprise flickered across Dr. Barrett's face, quickly replaced by his usual condescending demeanor. "Well, let's hope you can maintain that level of composure with all your patients. We wouldn't want any complaints now, would we?" As Dr. Barrett walked away, Naomi felt she had just passed some sort of test, one she should never have had to face in the first place. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of endless tasks and subtle slides. She found herself constantly double-checking her work, not because she doubted her abilities, but because she knew any mistake, no matter how small, would be magnified and used against her. As the day wore on, Naomi couldn't help but notice how her white colleagues breezed through their shifts, chatting and laughing, while she struggled under the weight of her disproportionate workload. The inequality was glaring, yet every time she considered speaking up, her mother's words held her back. "Don't you dare let them see you falter." By the time her shift ended, Naomi was physically and emotionally drained. As she gathered her things from her locker, she overheard two nurses whispering nearby. "Can you believe they're making such a big deal about diversity hires?" one said, her voice laced with disdain. "It's not like they can keep up with the rest of us anyway." Naomi's hand froze on her locker door, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted nothing more than to confront them, to defend herself and her abilities, but she knew that any confrontation would only reinforce their prejudices. Instead, she quietly closed her locker and walked out of the hospital, her head held high despite the weight of the day pressing down on her. As she waited at the bus stop, the same sleek black Mercedes pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing Dr. Barrett behind the wheel. "Nurse Clark," he called out, his voice dripping with false concern. "Waiting for the bus again? Such a shame. Looks like that's all you can afford on a nurse's salary, isn't it?" Before Naomi could respond, Dr. Barrett sped away, leaving her standing there, humiliated and angry. The casual cruelty of his words cut deep, reminding her once again of the uphill battle she faced. Mr. Edwards listened intently as Angela shared her experiences, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. "Thank you for your honesty, Nurse Parker," he said when she finished. "Your resilience in the face of such adversity is commendable, but it's time for systemic change, not just individual perseverance." Just then, there was another knock at the door. The hospital administrator entered, looking flustered. "Mr. Edwards," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I understand there have been some concerns about our hospital's practices. I assure you we take these matters very seriously." Mr. Edwards raised an eyebrow. "Do you? Because from what I've observed, the only thing being taken seriously here is maintaining an outdated and discriminatory status quo." The administrator paled, clearly unprepared for such direct criticism. "I'm not sure I understand. We have diversity initiatives in place." "Initiatives are not enough," Mr. Edwards cut her off. "What you need is a complete overhaul of your hospital's culture, starting at the top." Over the next few hours, he laid out his demands for change, calling for a full investigation into discriminatory practices at St. Mary's, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, and a revamp of the hospital's hiring and promotion practices. As for Dr. Barrett, he added, his voice hardening, I expect his behavior to be thoroughly investigated. His actions today were not just unprofessional, they were discriminatory and potentially dangerous to patient care." The administrator, realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded numbly. "Of course, Mr. Edwards. We'll begin implementing these changes immediately." As the day progressed, news of Mr. Edwards's true identity and the changes he was demanding spread throughout the hospital. The atmosphere in the halls of St. Mary's buzzed with a mix of fear, anticipation, and, for some, hope. Angela, still processing everything that had happened, found herself at the center of attention. Colleagues who had previously ignored or belittled her approached, some offering awkward apologies while others sought her insight on the upcoming changes. As her shift ended, Angela made her way to Mr. Edwards' room one last time. He was sitting up, looking tired but satisfied. "Nurse Parker," he greeted her with a warm smile, "I hope you don't mind, but I've recommended you for a position on the newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Your experiences and insights will be invaluable as we work to transform St. Mary's." A surge of emotion washed over Angela, gratitude, hope, and a renewed sense of purpose. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards," she said, her voice filled with sincerity. "Thank you, Nurse Parker," Mr. Edwards replied, shaking his head. "Your courage and professionalism in the face of adversity have been inspiring. You've reminded me why I entered healthcare in the first place, to make a difference in people's lives." As Angela left the hospital that evening, she sensed that a new chapter was beginning, not only for herself, but for St. Mary's as a whole. The path ahead would be challenging, but for the first time since starting her job, Angela felt a genuine hope for the future. Little did she know, the changes initiated that day would have far-reaching consequences, not just for St. Mary's, but for the entire healthcare industry. The story of a dedicated nurse and an unexpectedly influential patient was about to become a catalyst for unprecedented change. The following days at St. Mary's General Hospital were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. The revelation of Mr. Edwards's true identity and his demands for change sent shockwaves through the institution, cracking the once pristine facade and exposing long-standing issues. Early Monday morning, Angela arrived to find chaos. News vans were parked outside with reporters clamoring for statements from anyone willing to speak. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, with staff huddled in small groups whispering anxiously. As Angela walked to the nurses' station, she noticed Dr. Barrett being escorted to the administration offices by security. Their eyes met briefly, and Angela saw a mix of anger and fear in the doctor's gaze before he was led away. "Nurse Parker," a voice called out. Angela turned to see Sarah, a nurse who had previously been cold toward her, approaching with an awkward smile. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for how I've treated you. I didn't realize." Angela nodded, accepting the apology but unsure how to respond. Before she could say anything, an announcement came over the hospital's PA system. "All staff members are required to attend an emergency meeting in the main auditorium in 30 minutes. Attendance is mandatory." The auditorium was packed when Angela arrived, and she found a seat near the back, acutely aware of the curious glances and whispers that followed her. At the front of the room, Mr. Edwards, dressed sharply despite his arm casts, was speaking quietly with the hospital administrator and several other officials. As the room settled, Mr. Edwards stepped up to the podium, commanding immediate attention. The whispers died down to a tense silence. "Good morning," he began, his voice firm and authoritative. "For those who don't know me, I am Thomas Edwards, CEO of Healthcare United. Over the past week, I've been a patient here at St. Mary's recovering from a skiing accident. During this time, I've observed the day-to-day operations and culture of this hospital. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. What I witnessed was deeply troubling. I saw a culture of discrimination, bias, and unprofessional behavior that has no place in modern healthcare. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some staff members shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in agreement. "Let me be clear," Mr. Edwards continued, his tone intensifying. "The events I witnessed, particularly the treatment of Nurse Angela Parker, are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a systemic problem that has persisted for far too long." Angela felt all eyes in the room turn to her, and she sat up straighter, meeting their gazes with quiet dignity. Mr. Edwards outlined the changes that would be implemented immediately: a thorough investigation into discriminatory practices, mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff, and a complete overhaul of the hospital's hiring and promotion processes. Furthermore, he added, his voice hardening, those found to have engaged in discriminatory behavior will face serious consequences. This includes Dr. William Barrett, who has displayed unprofessional conduct. Dr. Thompson has been suspended pending a thorough investigation into his conduct. The announcement sent a wave of murmurs through the crowd. Angela noticed some of Dr. Thompson's longtime supporters looking shocked and angry, while others appeared relieved. "I know these changes may be challenging for some of you," Mr. Edwards continued, "but let me be clear. This isn't just about doing the right thing morally. It's about providing the best possible care for our patients. A diverse, inclusive, and respectful workplace leads to better outcomes for everyone." As Mr. Edwards concluded his speech, he made one final announcement that electrified the room. "Lastly, I want to introduce the person who will lead many of these changes, Nurse Angela Parker. She has agreed to take on the role of Chief Diversity Officer at St. Mary's. Her experiences and insights will be invaluable as we work to transform this institution." Angela felt a mix of shock, pride, and nervousness wash over her as applause filled the room. She hadn't expected this announcement, having only discussed joining the Diversity and Inclusion Committee with Mr. Edwards. As she made her way to the front at his invitation, she noticed a range of emotions on her colleagues' faces: surprise, respect, and, in some cases, lingering resentment. Standing at the podium, Angela took a deep breath before addressing the crowd. "Thank you, Mr. Edwards. To all of you, I want to say this. I stand before you not as an adversary, but as a colleague who believes in the potential of St. Mary's and everyone in this room. The road ahead won't be easy, but I'm committed to working with all of you to create a hospital where every staff member feels valued and every patient receives the best possible care, regardless of their background." As Angela spoke, she noticed the impact of her words. Some staff members nodded in agreement, while others appeared thoughtful. Even those who had been openly hostile to her in the past seemed to listen intently. After the meeting, Angela found herself surrounded by colleagues offering congratulations, apologies, and, in some cases, tentative olive branches. The atmosphere in the hospital had shifted dramatically. While tension and uncertainty remained, there was also a palpable sense of hope and possibility. Throughout the day, Angela collaborated with Mr. Edwards and the hospital administration to begin implementing the promised changes. It was exhausting but exhilarating work, and for the first time since starting at St. Mary's, Angela felt like she was genuinely making a difference. That evening, as Angela prepared to leave the hospital, She found Mr. Edwards waiting for her near the exit. "Nurse Parker," he said with a warm smile. "Or should I say, Chief Diversity Officer Parker. How are you holding up?" Angela let out a tired laugh. "It's been quite a day, Mr. Edwards. I'm still processing everything, to be honest." Mr. Edwards nodded understandingly. "I know it's a lot to take in. I want you to know that I have full confidence in your ability to lead these changes. Your resilience and integrity in the face of adversity are exactly what St. Mary's needs right now." As they walked out together, Mr. Edwards turned to Angela with a serious expression. "You should know that what's happening here at St. Mary's is just the beginning. I plan to implement similar changes across all of Healthcare United's facilities. Your story, Angela, has the potential to spark a revolution in how we approach diversity and inclusion in healthcare." Angela felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, but rather than feeling burdened, she felt empowered. "I'm ready for the challenge," she replied. "Together, we can make real, lasting change." As they parted ways, Angela reflected on how much had transformed in just a few short days. From feeling isolated and ready to give up, she now stood at the forefront of a movement that could change not only St. Mary's, but the entire healthcare industry. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles and resistance from those reluctant to embrace change. However, as Angela looked back at the hospital, she felt a surge of determination. This was no longer just a job, it was a calling, a chance to ensure that no healthcare professional would have to endure what she had experienced. With renewed purpose, Angela set off into the evening, prepared to face whatever challenges awaited her. The transformation at St. Mary's had begun, ushering in a new chapter in the fight for equality and inclusion in healthcare. In the months that followed Mr. Edwards's revelation, St. Mary's General Hospital underwent a remarkable transformation under Angela's leadership as Chief Diversity Officer. With Mr. Edwards's ongoing support, the previously toxic culture began to shift toward inclusivity and respect. The mandatory diversity and inclusion training, initially met with skepticism, gradually opened eyes and changed hearts. Dr. Thompson, following a comprehensive investigation, was dismissed from his role, sending a clear message that discriminatory behavior would no longer be tolerated. As the changes at St. Mary's gained traction, Angela found herself in high demand as a speaker at medical conferences and diversity seminars. 1 year after Mr. Edwards' intervention, she stood before a packed audience at a national health care conference. "A year ago, I was a nurse on the brink of giving up," Angela began. "Today, I stand before you as living proof that change is possible and that one voice can make a difference." She shared the inspiring story of St. Mary's transformation, candidly addressing the challenges faced while also celebrating the victories. The lives touched, minds changed, and culture shifted. After the conference, Mr. Edwards, now fully recovered from his injuries, approached Angela with a warm smile. "Angela," he greeted her, "you've come a long way from the nurse I met a year ago." They discussed the progress at St. Mary's and its ripple effects across the healthcare industry. Mr. Edwards revealed that several other hospitals in the Healthcare United network had begun implementing similar programs. "You know, Angela," he said, "when I checked into St. Mary's after my skiing accident, I never could have imagined the journey it would set in motion. You've not only transformed St. Mary's, but also reignited my passion for this work." As Angela prepared to return to St. Mary's, she reflected on her incredible journey from an isolated, frustrated nurse to a leader and change-maker. She had come so far, and while the work was far from over, Angela felt a sense of hope and determination stronger than ever. Upon her return to St. Mary's, she was greeted by Sarah, once a distant colleague but now a strong ally. The hospital buzzed with renewed energy, staff members collaborating and communicating in ways they never had before. In the main lobby, Angela paused before a new mural depicting a diverse group of healthcare professionals working together. A plaque below read, "Diversity is our strength. Inclusion is our commitment. Compassion is our calling." As she settled into her office, ready to tackle new challenges, Angela smiled. The transformation of St. Mary's was just the beginning. The real work of changing hearts, minds, and entire systems was ongoing, and she was ready for it all, committed to fighting for a truly inclusive healthcare system, one day at a time. What moment in Angela's journey resonated with you the most? Was it her perseverance in the face of discrimination, or perhaps Mr. Edwards's unexpected intervention? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to my channel. I pour my heart into crafting these inspiring stories for you, and your support is what keeps me going. I appreciate having you on this journey.